Chapter 72. Whatever had once been a kingdom under the earth, it was no more. No more stories would be written of it, no more tales of its treasures or wonders would grace the minds of those who dreamed of lands of salt and stone. For a tomb of rock had been laid over it with great care, and by all rights, it should have been their tomb, too. Ruslana grumbled internally, because there was no real reason to be angry. At the last second, something had sort of popped reality like Lorelei did. She had thought it was Mildred at first, but it clearly hadn't been. And Leopold was acting shadier than usual, perhaps he had finally been hit with the trauma of his misdeeds. It didn't matter though. They were all alive, save Zhao. And she refused to believe he was dead, because she had seen the dragon rising from his great depths, and whether it was hers to fight and fall combat against Lazarus again or not, she had felt a strange sense of hope. Perhaps even the destroyers of this place were on their side, really. Against all this.
So. Enough of that. Thought, memory. Take stock.
They were above ground, that much was for certain, but a great deal of stone and rock had been moved with them. Nobody seemed crushed, but outside of her they were certainly pinned. Bones had begun to repair himself, which meant she wouldn't be working entirely on her own impulse, but Leo was in bad shape, probably needed more knowledgeable triage. And Zambi needed water? Probably. Ruslana tried to imagine the various states of plant-based medical care, and failed. Grendolf'd probably know. She chuckled, just a little. The old lich wasn't here, though, so she'd have to do. Crawling to her feet and shaking the last little bits of stone from where they had fallen, she was greeted by Thought, who chirped and shone with light. They weren't that far away from the drop-off point. Ruslana motioned far away, and the drone sped off, hopefully to find Lorelei, and get her help. Even if she couldn't aid them, though. They could make it.
Oh dear. I feel as if I finally danced close with laughing death, itself. Zhao, are you all right?
Bones' first words after a great time stung her to the heart, but Ruslana did her best not to show anything as she wheeled about on her feet.
Sorry. It's me. Zhao is probably.
No. It was a very quiet voice, but its quietness made it stand out against cynicism and caution. No. It repeated. I will not be silenced, and you will not give in to fear.
He'll be all right. No idea where he is, but we'll find him. How are you holding up?
Bones reattached his right arm, wiggling the brackish tar substance that held him together around. It jostled fragments of his skeletal structure into place, then hardened. And Bones rattled off a laugh, as shaky as it was.
Well, miss, I can't say I've enjoyed being so shattered, but there's probably been worse that I've done myself the favor of forgetting. Are you all right?
It made her incredibly happy when someone asked about how she was, but Ruslana deigned not to show it, instead giving a curt, but not impolite, nod.
Yes. I don't know what to do for Zambi, however. She looks awfully drained, and I don't want to move her.
Bones had sidled over to the prone, colorless and withered-seeming plant girl. He tilted his skull from left to right, obviously deep in thought. Ruslana watched with unconcealed interest as he, slowly, walked back, rooting around in the soil. She moved to help him, but the skeleton had already found what he was looking for. Slowly, he traced his way back, strands of roots speared by his bony fingers. It wasn't much water, but, realizing how foolish she had been, Ruslana ran over and uncorked her emergency canteen. Slowly, some of the color started to return to Zambi's face, but she wasn't awake, not yet. Then, with a very mischievous tone for a skeleton so old, Bones leaned forwards and whispered something so quietly that Ruslana couldn't hear even a murmur of it. But whatever it was, Zambi burst up from the ground, both arms thrust into the air.
What did I miss?
Her energy was so impressive, especially for being virtually dead a few moments ago, that Ruslana found herself speechless. A gentle gust of breeze overhead rustled her freshly shorn head, and Zemby, arms still outstretched to the air, slowly lowered them, realizing that perhaps it wasn't quite time for celebration. Just yet.
Well, we all got out okay, so that's great. So, about what you were saying. Oh ho. I lied.
Both Bones and Zemby burst into howling laughter, and Ruslana felt incredibly left out, but somehow that didn't make it any less amusing, and soon she was laughing as well. They had made it out alive, after all, and she felt certain that Zhao would fall into their midst anytime, soon.
Can't even let a man get his rest. I swear, if I had known the lot of you were going to be this loud.
Without a cane to stand, Leo was pretty much limited to limping incredibly slow and glowering a lot. Maybe that was a good thing. Still, the older man had woken up to see his various wounds and the lack of an underground kingdom around them, and come to the obvious conclusion that they weren't in any mortal danger anymore. Apparently.
I'll rest when I'm dead. Let's not rush to get there too quickly.
Ruslana murmured a little more snappily than she intended, and of the mind it sounded cooler in her head.
Oh ho, don't worry about that. Sometimes even being dead won't let you rest.
Bones added, helpfully. But somewhat terrifyingly.
I'll keep that in mind. For now, though, does everyone think they're in good enough condition to move forward?
Bones replied kindly and quietly, Zemby replied enthusiastically. Leopold didn't reply, but his scowl was animated enough, and Ruslana had a good idea of how to keep the old man on his feet.
Fantastic! Seems the best course of action is to make our way back home, then. And
Tiny tufts of cotton fluff. At first, that's what it looked like. Strands of skinned dandelions rooted up from the ground and round one another, their looped hides creating a maze of flower flesh. But then whatever was growing from the uprooted earth swelled up and around itself, bulging like an unusually overburnt marshmallow whose white hide was bulging with something desperate to tear itself free, with hidden sharpnesses just visible underneath.
Are you friend, or foe?
Ruslana heard herself say, as if out of body. The surface of the now human tall and lumpen creature rippled, looking as if it might teeter over. And then it did just that. Tiny ruptures appeared in its flesh, and from those ruptures spilled even tinier copies that fed back into itself, and the deflated carcass began to swell and grow again.
I don't understand.
Leopold had raised himself up with great strain, but it looked as if he could notice none of it all, so horrified was the expression on his face.
You three. Run. I think this is something. I tried to take a bit of Dragunov's power to escape, when we were in trouble, and yet this, it feels different. Did I kill him?
Ruslana pursed her lips. She couldn't say anything about the horrified, incredibly self-hating tone in Leopold's voice, or the ways of magic. But she didn't feel that the great dragon would die to whatever hedge magic Leopold had cobbled together, especially hasty and misperformed. And this felt. Now, the towering mass, wobbling as if it were made from a bunch of different jellies thrown together and left to rot and molder, was easily big enough to engulf all of them. It was moving very slowly, however, its own mass a liability as it tried to find purchase against the barren and lifeless ground. Ruslana considered her rifle. It felt so heavy in her hands.
I don't want to cause a panic, but I really think we should do something.
Zemby started to whisper as the now towering colossus poured towards them, its speed doubling with every second, and Ruslana cut her off.
Leopold, take this. I don't need it.
The old man was shaken out of his fearful trance as she braced his bad side against her rifle, the axe bayonet a surprisingly decent stock. It sank into the ground as he relaxed against it, hobbling forward. And they should have fled minutes ago. But Ruslana hadn't given the order, and perhaps it was because her life was flashing before her eyes. The great towering blob in front of them didn't seem hostile, but it didn't matter. It tore up ground and fed it into itself as it did so, sloshing from side to side and cooing.
Listen. The three of you. Leave. Run. Get out of here. Zambi. Help Leo. Bones, if you could make sure they keep moving.
Bones had been silent because he had lived a long time, and a long enough time to know precisely what was on her mind. The skeleton moved behind her, and behind them, arms up.
We'll meet again, of course. Please be careful, miss.
She could hear Zambi yelling things, probably angry. That was fine, they'd only be in danger in a situation like this. She wasn't even sure if the blob was an opponent, really, and yet. Each step she took felt heavy. She could feel the mud, was it mud, jostling her boots with every push against it. The gelatinous mass had stopped quivering, and even without eyes, it seemed to be waiting for her to make the first move. The shouting had stopped soon enough. Bones was incredibly reliable. Or maybe reliability was a function of age, and seeing too many others lost to situations that you felt you could have changed. Perhaps that was what led her on, now. Ruslana's fingers felt cold. She had no rifle. No axe. No weapon at all. And that cooing was wretched. It wasn't unpleasant, but it seemed to burrow in the back of the brain and whisper, just stop moving, come to a halt. Let things end. Sleep. And worst of all, she felt certain it was familiar, and maybe even an echo of words she had once found comforting, and staring up past the tall shadow cast by the wavering morass, Ruslana steeled herself and placed her hand against the center of its mass. The rubbery feeling of sludge and viscous tar was marred by something else. It felt electrical and cold and alien. Perhaps this is what the end of the world felt like. With all her courage, Ruslana addressed the quivering mass.
Let us be. We'll all be gone soon, and those up ahead are none of your concern. We've no desire to be your enemy.
Slowly, a recession opened up in the flesh of the thing, revealing an indentation that she realized was some sort of eye, completely uniform and yet lacking in any particular color. It shifted, reflecting the nervousness she wished hadn't been visible on her face. And then another eye opened, and another, and the tower was pulsating with the flickering of a million reflective irises. And then came the sound. It was loud and distorted and static and sent her reeling backwards, clawing at her ears as each one of the many eyes slowly ate over itself, while the pillar loomed over her. She could feel blood, and perhaps something else, stirring and threatening to loose itself in her veins, and it almost felt like it wanted to join whatever that was there. And Ruslana's resolve did not waver.
I came this far, let it be known that the last soldier of the last country in the world fell here, today. And there will be no soldiers after me, and finally may the old soldier rest. Seems a fitting end, doesn't it?
Of course, outside of the static howling, it could not answer, and she knew well why. To imagine they had come this far, to imagine there had ever been a hope of returning home, or that they had actually been in another world this entire time. What a lovely dream that had been. Howling, Ruslana threw herself forward at the clumsily conjoined manifestation of two worlds never meant to be as one. She found a small, sharp rock, and tore at its side, and inside she could finally see what lurked within. Fragments of crackling wire and snippets of magic words, whether woven by sorcerers or scientists, it mattered not to her. And where they sizzled and died, the beast only grew further, feeding off itself in a way that should not have been possible. The entity, ephemeral as it was, showed no sign of pain or recognition. Already coolant, or perhaps biomass was feeding into the small tear and the pillar continued to grow. Ruslana dodged it as it collapsed where she had stood, engulfing thought in a cascade of falling flesh. Cursing, Ruslana looked around for a better weapon, settling on a large branch. It felt heavy in her hands, but wasn't sharp at all. Wielding it like a javelin, she threw it forward. It stuck into her opponent's skin, like a stick of cinnamon in rice pudding, and then it was snapped, and engulfed. It grew larger. Ruslana had already shimmied up the tree. She had found the fallen branch at the base of, launching herself against the entity and crashing her boots into it, before rolling to the ground. Her shoulders ached, and as her vision flickered and died a little more, she could hear the whirring crunch of memory being subsumed. Then the entity split, flooding in either direction around her until she was completely surrounded. It rose up over its thin membrane, stretched thin enough to be transparent and display whatever infernal circuitry kept it going. Perhaps Paul would have known. Laughing, she fell to the ground, good eye shut. There was no way this could even tell she was a threat. It wasn't even an enemy. Not really. And there was no way it'd recognize any act of defiance. And she thought for a moment, of a life she'd like to live. Rising to her feet unsteadily, Ruslana tightened her fists until their whites had gone cherry red.
Useless as it is, I suppose this'll be settled soon enough. Are you ready to die?
The taunt fell on deaf ears, and she ran forward, eyes still shut. And then it was over, or should have been.
No.
Ruslana paused, a morass of white and wired mushy teeth held in a halo of impermeable flesh around her head. Only just had that single word been said when the wall of thin flesh exploded from inside, torn apart by 1,000 green flashes of light, serpentine and sinuous. Teeth the color of emeralds devoured the fleeing mess from within before bursting into fire, leaving only a grey slurry where their colors fled.
It seems my fate is decided here. Shall we make a stand, then?
Grendolf extended one red-crusted arm, skeletal and gaunt, and where it carved the sky, lancets of baleful green danced, and writhed. Truly, the entity had never stood a chance. It exploded on itself around Ruslana, burning away into that same grey slurry as the Crimson Lich admired his handiwork. And she felt relieved, but a sudden chill went up her spine. It felt familiar. That horrible sense of déjà vu that she felt had preceded the world tearing itself up around them. The way that the creature, portals of flesh quivering in fear as it was devoured by forces darker and hungrier than itself, had shown some glimmer of sentience before its own death. His arrival. So timely. As if it had been.
Well. Suppose I should thank you. Seems like it'd be right.
And then the clouds burst, showering them with grey rain, and the grey rain formed tiny flickering pieces of land in every conceivable color, and some were metal and some were grass and some were floating bits of ocean stacked up over themselves. They didn't subsume what they touched at least, but where they fell, occasional odd chimes and notes sounded, too. Like someone had jammed keys in a motor and kept on turning it. Grendolf watched her impassively, the skeletal expression on his unchanging face as enigmatic as it was, as it always had been.
It would be right. You are safe, now. We will try again.
Grendolf held out his hand, pleadingly.
But we must go. It is vital that we go. We must go, now.
And she thought about how easy it'd be, because she didn't want to die here, and she wanted to make things better, and Grendolf was a way of doing just that. She could run away with him, and perhaps through his magics and her iron will, they would continue to try until they found some fragment of hope, some universal key, some secret that would preserve this place like a memory in time.
Sorry. Afraid I can't. There's a really lovely young woman counting on my help, a gentle young man who needs to be rescued by a charming soldier, and a whole slew of friends relying on me. Am I not your friend? Yes. You're one of my best friends.
The two were silent, and Grendolf stared up into the sky, empty sockets watching empty rains that paused above him, burning in green. They still made strange sounds as they fell, and finally the Lich sighed, like the death rattle of an era.
Know this, Ruslana. All will suffer, and then there will be an end for you. But I will remember you. I shall remember your bravery. I shall remember your sacrifice. And I.
How old was he? She knew that they couldn't keep talking like this, not when the tension had become so thick that it felt the horizon itself might split open, but... Ruslana reached out her own hand, and felt the scars and lines on it against his skeletal grip.
I have considered you a true friend, as well.
Both were silent for a moment more, then finally Ruslana withdrew her hand. Now it was her turn to stare skyward, watching the swirling mess of potholes above where clouds and atmosphere and stars and light had simply fallen, leaving empty gaps to nowhere like some backdrop, torn from an aging bunker wall.
What now, then? I'm afraid I cannot let you pass. I suppose our plans were never truly aligned. My duty is to protect my friends. All of them. And I did indeed fail it, and yours. There is never any hope at all after the dragons awake. Or so I surmise. It is a strange thing. How many cycles have we witnessed, and still left grasping at strands?
Grendolf chuckled, and shook his staff.
The Unday realm below the earth held a special place for me. Many fine serpents lived there, when Lazarus was well. I am glad you saw it. As to your question, we shall fight. I shall fight you fairly. And, then, you shall die. Confident, afraid I'll win, and spare you, and we'll laugh about this later. No more words, then. No more words.
And then Grendolf launched himself into the horizon above. She saw something behind him, and it caught his attention too. It was like a faint, grey-white oval in the ruined sky, staring down at them. She almost thought it had been an eye, but it did not linger, whatever it was. Then, his magics surrounded him, all of his magics, the old magics, spells and curses and hexes that had seen so many millennia of refinement that they might shatter entire universes, circles upon circles of green light that wove themselves into star serpents that ate worlds and crushed concepts beneath their teeth. Staring into the sky, it had turned entirely green, and the spell serpents faced down at her, shattering into gems of light that would cascade against her being, and that would be the end, for her. Around her feet, the ground began to crack again, too, rupturing so that even if she could have dodged, it seemed destined for her to fall back into that open, salted tomb. Laughing, Ruslana wiped the blood from her hand, and cracked her knuckles. No weapon, no allies, no hope. And yet... Roaring a challenge, Ruslana faced up as the magic shattered above, and the light of countless dead worlds fell down upon her. But she was pretty sure they weren't supposed to make a sound like doink 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 and scatter harmlessly like that. For his part, Grendolf seemed pretty miffed, too. It had been a really impressive light show after all.
You aren't taking Lana.
The blonde figure who had pulled herself from the fissure in the earth below was dressed in what seemed to be the tatters of a pillowcase, and wielding a large tree branch that was still coated in quick-dry monster goop. But of course, for a real hero, that was all that was needed.
How? You were defeated. I foresaw it.
Ruslana had seen it though, a moment, just a moment, where if anything might have registered on the Lich's long-dead face. It might possibly have been joy. The chattering of his blood-red jaw chattered on pointlessly though as she embraced Calimere, who was quite bruised and scratched, and sobbed openly.
Whoa there, feel free to save some of the waterworks for later. I'm still half dead, so I don't know if the tears of sweet maidens'll have a bad effect on me. Nope, seems fine. You ready to show this villain the error of his ways? Again. It won't be a problem. He's not all that.
Grendolf's jaw clattered, went silent, and fell off. Calimere coughed, blood and something else, dust, it seemed. Ruslana could hear the creaking of her bones as the hero stretched, wincing with the exhaustion of someone who had spent a long time buried. Her toothy grin widened as she saw Ruslana's eye patch.
Wow, is that, my parka? Neat. It suits you, Lana. Though I'm a little sad you cut up my best parka. It's cold out here. The underbiss was roastin', so I didn't mind so much, but... You don't even care that I'm here, do you? If you would like my jacket.
Grendolf roared, attempting to get their attention, and so he did. Kaylee Muir whirled on the ball of her feet, tongue stuck out, and hurled the large branch like a javelin. It spun through the air and struck true, bouncing off Grendolf's skull and sending the, very surprised, lich crashing to the slurry-ridden ground.
No, please. We'll have time for that later. I'm a little worried that my body'll remember I'm dead and just give out on me, so let's beat feet. A friendly demon guy shared one of the elevator rides up, and briefed me on everything. The other demon though, erg. It was a commute, alright. Sounds rough. Try to hold on, we'll get back as quick as we can. If we can catch up to the rest of them. Leo's with us, now.
Kaylee Muir laughed, grinning widely.
Heroes don't hold grudges. Though I might mess him up just a bit for messing you up, no? Fine. Let's do this.
Grendolf had pulled himself together, wheezing with the dry surprise only a skeletal mage could muster. As the strange, polychromatic rain of terrain fell around them, the lich gave one last arrogant huff, and chanted the death spells of yore. That no longer answered him, for so long as the hero lived, his true magics returned to dormancy. Shaking with surprise, anger, and an unknown emotion that he could not recall the name of, Grendolf shouted towards the two of them.
There is nothing that may change this, your actions will only hurt us all, more. No matter what unpredictable chaos brought you here, no matter what happens, there is no use.
And then, unceremoniously, Zhao hurtled down from the sky and crushed Grendolf into the ground with a thundering crash. Chapter end.